Hi, it's me, Ingrid INFP, and I wanted to talk about what's the difference between a mental disorder and MBTI. What's the difference between personality disorder and MBTI? What's the difference between neurodevelopmental disorders and MBTI? Because, there are certain mental health disorders that are temporary or that are something that comes a short period of your life and that aren't actually something that you grow up with, like MBTI. So like depression, you might have bouts of panic anxiety, or you might have social anxiety or that kind of thing, periods of you might develop psychosis later in life, during your early adulthood, schizophrenia, you might develop different things. But as a child, cognitively, our cognitive wiring is made up of MBTI, but it's also ADHD, autism, that kind of thing. Personality disorders come later in life and usually because of some early trauma, most of the time. Because you cannot be diagnosed with a personality disorder if you're under 18. I think that you can be beforehand, but it's kind of not really based on anything. And a lot of these disorders go together. So ADHD often goes with bipolar disorder, which goes with, being an ENFP or something like that, which isn't a disorder, but let's face it, a lot of NE users have ADHD compared to other people. I don't know why that's the case. If it's the ENFP-ness that leads to ADHD, or if it's the other way around. Or if it's just that ENFPs look like they have ADHD and they actually don't. Studies aren't really done on this, but there is something to it. I would guess that NFs are more prone to depression than other types. I would guess that autism is more common in an ISTJ than other types. I would consider maybe OCD being a judger type. Either that or or you're having a really tougher time with those disorders than the regular person who has those disorders. Because imagine if you were an ISTJ with ADHD. That must suck, you know? You derive a lot of comfort and like structure in your life. You derive happiness from structure in your life, and then like you can't have any structure. That would be terrible. And if you're an ENFP with autism, you'd have such want to create routines for yourself, and then you can't do that. So obviously every disorder is manifested differently and different people, and every INFP is different from the other, and so we can't really talk in general terms like this. But you've got to admit that there is maybe some kind of correlation. So I was looking at what's the definition according to Wikipedia of a mental disorder. It says here, a mental disorder, also referred to as mental illness or psychiatric disorder, is a behavioral or mental pattern that causes significant distress or impairment of personal functioning. So yes, it is a behavioral or mental pattern. And mental pattern, then we think, is it cognition? Is it MBTI? Behavioral, less so for MBTI, because it's not that much about behavior. But it causes significant distress or impairment of personal functioning. And that's where, MBTI is not about dysfunction, it's about how we function. But being a certain type in certain environments can cause distress an impairment of personal functioning. Because, well, you've got to admit that being an ESTJ in this world is easier than being, say, an INFJ or something like that. So there will be more stress for us compared to certain other types when it comes to our culture. And it does say later on that this is that we have to, cultural and religious beliefs as well as social norms should be taken into account when making a diagnosis, because it has to be in a social context. So I don't know if I've told you guys about this, but I had a patient about a year ago at a clinic where I work who is Muslim. And I came to retrieve her child and her from the waiting room because I only had 15 minutes for this patient, so I was a little bit impatient. And the girl starts like coming towards me when I call her name, because the girl is about maybe 7 or 8. But the mother is like standing up. She suddenly like stands up and starts muttering to herself and closing her eyes and like rocking a little bit back and forth. And I genuinely thought that she was having a psychotic episode. I was like, what is going on? And then I realized, then the daughter told me, oh, she's praying. And I realized, okay, yes, true, she prays. But I didn't know like at what time of day people of the Islamic religion pray. I know that they have to do so 5 times a day, but I don't actually know what the times are. So it just happened to be kind of a bad moment for her to have to pray. Like I couldn't stop her. I was like, we need to go. Can you like do this a little bit later? And she just kept like closing her eyes and rocking back and forth. And I felt really bad having to like interrupt her, but at the same time, this is a little bit, what if this had been life or death? It wasn't, because the girl was not that sick. But I couldn't spare the time like for her prayer. But that doesn't matter. In the end, it all went fine. But I started thinking like, yes, okay. So certain behaviors in certain cultures can seem psychotic to other cultures, but might seem completely acceptable and even commendable behavior or perceptions of the world in other cultures. So a lot of Christian people will say that they heard God speak, you know, and it's like, okay, are they hallucinating? And if so, like, is this something that is completely acceptable in the culture? Maybe they might not even notice that it's that they have psychotic things. So there's all this cultural stuff around diagnosis, especially psychosis. But even things like OCD, like, I mean, in certain cultures, there are certain rituals that you have to do in order to do certain things. And so that's a little bit what happens during with OCD. Superstition, that kind of thing, is linked to OCD. And there are certain disorders that are coupled heavily with how the culture looks. And I think that ADHD is becoming more popularized now, but it's also because of the environment, in a way, that we have a difficulty concentrating. But also I think that maybe this environment makes ADHD more apparent, because we have so much more stimuli around us at all times. So somebody with ADHD who lived on a farm in the middle of nowhere, they might have just thought, well, he daydreams, but it's not as much like impairing all of the executive functions. If or a person with autism who would milk the cows every morning, that would be his ritual. And they would do that and not be overwhelmed by a lot of neon lights and everything that's in the environment. So there is a lot to take into account when it comes to mental health and disorders and what we call a disorder. So psychiatrists go through this booklet called the DSM-5, which is where all the criteria of different diagnoses are. And the reason that I started thinking about all this is because I started thinking like, oh, like I might be going through the diagnostic process to get a diagnosis of ADHD or autism. And I don't want to go through that, but it's like, if I can get accommodations and help, then I will gladly do so. I don't want to, but like if I could get accommodations for being an INFP, I would take it. But nobody in the psychiatric community, it's not counted as a mental disorder, so you don't get any help in life for that, and nobody knows what an INFP is. So while people do start knowing what a person with ADHD might have trouble with, and I had to go to the occupational therapist, and we talked for more than an hour about all of the problems in my life, and it's a lot, without talking about the depression. I mean, I was talking just about my daily routines and all the stuff that I can't do very well, and all the sensing stuff, basically. The practical stuff, that's chores I have to do in day-to-day life. And I was telling him like, oh, well, I'm reading like several books at the same time because I can't concentrate on any. And I can't wash the dishes because then I get distracted by something else, or I have a hard time with showering because all the sounds and the feelings, the sensory stuff is too loud. And she was writing down a lot, and seeing this all written down in the journal is a lot. And she said that she was going to talk to the therapist about, the occupational therapist is going to talk to the therapist because we're going to meet up and decide if she's going to write a referral to the psychiatry department at the hospital. And yeah, I was a little bit in a identity crisis, existential crisis, dissociation mode when I got out of there. I was like, oh shit, my life is a mess. And then I had to go to work, and at work, I had a talk with my supervisor, which was really good. But I realized that FE users, I'm surrounded by FE users all the time. My friends are FE users, my work colleagues are FE users, and they are very much into that, oh, well, we are all the same. Everybody is unique, so we are all the same. And so we should take comfort in the fact that we are not alone and that we are all human, and celebrate that. And I love that style of thought. I do, but at this moment, I want to some validation in the fact that I am weird. Okay, I've gone through my whole life being weird, and I want some help for that. I don't think that I can work in the same way as everybody else, and I'm not comforted by the fact if everybody else has it this hard, then I'm not happy. You know, that means that everybody is struggling a massive amount. We are all struggling in different ways, but I don't think that I'm the master at blending in. I really don't. I think that I do appear pretty strange and not like the regular person that you meet on the street. And it's been like that since I was 2 or 3 years old. And it would give me some kind of explanation, some kind of comfort knowing that the reason why I am weird. I might not be ADHD or autistic. Maybe I'm just an INFP. But to get a diagnosis might be a good thing. My supervisor bought me some chocolate, and that was really sweet of her, because she could tell that I was like, I'm holding it together, and I'm doing really good at work, and everybody loves me at work. I even got into a fight with I got into a fight with the pharmacist, because he didn't want to give my patient the medicine that I had prescribed. And like, I'm pretty confident in certain things in my role. But at home, it doesn't work. It doesn't work. And I can't, my parents are not people that I can really trust to talk about this with, and my friends have enough to deal with themselves, and it's not their job to take care of me. So I have to turn towards healthcare system and hope that they can help me in some way, because otherwise I'm all alone in this, you know. So there's a certain point where I don't want to be alone in this, because I want help. I need to have some accommodations, otherwise I'll get burnt out every year for the rest of my life. And my supervisor said, you have many years ahead of you to look forward to, and you can't keep pushing this away from you. You need to like go forward on this. So that's why I'm doing everything I can now. I bought, I took out a ton of books about ADHD. I'm trying to read them. Maybe I don't have ADHD, maybe I don't have autism, and that's what kind of scares me if I don't have that. Maybe I just relate a lot to it because of being an INFP. Maybe I relate to it because I have some other disorder. I don't want to be diagnosed with something like borderline personality or bipolar disorder, but if I can get help for it, then I might as well go for it. Because I need help. We're not alone in the universe. Sometimes we need to get help. And it's hard for me to do that because I'm used to being independent and all that. And I've always had to manage a little bit on my own when it comes to my daily life. I'm pretty dependent on my parents. I'm trying to get away from that. But I think that's... So INFP is a little bit of a way to push the problem away from yourself by saying this is a personality type and not a mental health disorder. But it does give some kinds of, well, difficulties in life. It gives difficulties in life because your cognition is not the same as everybody else's. And even if it has its positives, well, certain of these disorders can have its positives, like ADHD can have its positives if it helps creative people work on their creations. Autistic people can really hyper-focus and be really dedicated to these interests that they have. People with borderline personality can be really, really loyal to the people that they love. Obviously, they can also have a lot of emotional reactions to things, but and it's probably pretty toxic. But there are good things to certain of these ways of thinking. thing is, when it comes to personality types, it's not something to be treated, and it's something to be celebrated rather than treated. But that's where the line between MBTI and neurodevelopmental disorders start overlapping, because, well, you can't really treat autism either. So that's where I'm like getting into a little bit of a mind-blown state, because, well, what really separates MBTI from mental health disorders? It's not medication, because certain disorders don't require medication, and you don't need a psychotherapy to live as an INFP. But you do see more INFPs in therapy than, well, ISTJs. There are also certain, in the big five, there are certain negative aspects that are taken up, like neuroticism. I'm like super high on neuroticism, which sucks. And like, that's what I don't like about the big five, is that it has negative connotations and positive connotations with different scales. So like conscientiousness is a good thing to have, and I'm like not really, I'm kind of in the middle. Well, MBTI, all the scales are positive in every direction, which I do appreciate. So yeah, that's what I had to say on the subject. Sorry for this super long video, as usual. I'm curious to know what you guys think, because this is probably a topic that's been talked about before, but I'm still pretty confused about how people differentiate between these two things. I'm going to try to not overthink. My supervisor told me, don't overthink, just keep going, and take breaks when you need it. Don't be so hard on yourself. She was telling me a lot of prepping stuff, and she said that I was a wonderful person who does things in her own way, and that's okay. And I do appreciate that. So I want to say the same for you guys. Okay, so have a great day. Bye.